My wife's affair exposed a plot to steal my pension and stage my death. So I recorded everything, called the FBI, and watched her empire collapse. The dashboard camera footage flickered on the smartphone screen, shaky and grainy. Ben stared at it, coffee growing cold in his hands, watching his son-in-law's trembling fingers navigate the playback controls. "Just watch," Jake whispered, his voice hollow. "Tell me I'm losing my mind." Ben squinted at the small screen. His daughter Emily walked into frame, approaching a tall man in a white chef's coat outside Millfield Cafe. They embraced briefly. Too briefly for anything romantic, Ben thought, and disappeared inside. "That's Simon Rodriguez," Ben said, forcing a chuckle. "The pastry guy from culinary school. Emily's probably ordering your birthday cake, son. You're being paranoid." Jake's jaw tightened. "Keep watching." The timestamp showed 43 minutes of conversation through the cafe window. Emily and Simon sat across from each other, notebooks spread between them, pointing at what looked like design sketches. "See?" Ben relaxed. "Business meeting. Cake designs." "Rewind it," Jake said quietly. "To the part where they leave." Ben's finger moved backward through the footage. Emily and Simon exited together, shook hands professionally, and walked toward separate vehicles. "Nothing suspicious. Nothing." "Stop," Jake commanded. "Look at the reflection in the cafe window across the street." Ben leaned closer. In the warped glass reflection, barely visible, a motel entrance came into view. Two figures emerged from a ground-floor room. The woman wore a distinctive beige trench coat and emerald scarf, the same outfit Susan had claimed she'd worn to her book club that afternoon. The man beside her was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a leather jacket. His hand rested possessively on her lower back as they walked toward a black pickup truck. Ben froze. "That's impossible," he breathed. Jake's voice was barely audible. "I thought I was tracking my wife's affair. Turns out we were both being played." Ben Walker had taught high school history for 37 years. He'd seen students lie, parents manipulate, administrators scheme, but nothing had prepared him for the earthquake now fracturing his foundation. Susan had been his second chance at happiness. His first wife, Emily's mother, had passed from cancer when Emily was 16. After 5 lonely years, Susan entered his life like sunshine through storm clouds, warm, attentive, seemingly devoted to building a life together. Now, sitting in his kitchen at 6 o'clock in the morning, Ben replayed the dashboard footage for the dozenth time. The reflection was unmistakable. Susan's walk, her laugh, the way she tilted her head when listening, all captured in that warped glass mirror. Jake sat across from him, hollow-eyed and exhausted. "I've been following Emily for 2 weeks, convinced she was cheating, installing tracking apps, checking her messages, driving myself crazy with suspicion. While Susan was actually..." Ben couldn't finish the sentence. "I'm sorry, Ben. I should have realized sooner." The timing, the locations, Susan was using Emily's legitimate meetings as cover. Ben set the phone down carefully, his teacher's mind already organizing facts, timelines, evidence. "Who is he?" Jake pulled out a tablet and opened a browser. "Ryan Torino, municipal contracts inspector, divorced last year under what the court records call suspicious financial circumstances." The photo showed a man in his mid-40s with piercing blue eyes and the kind of predatory smile Ben had learned to recognize in problem students, the type who charmed their way out of consequences. "He specializes in infrastructure audits," Jake continued. "Roads, utilities, public buildings, high-dollar contracts with plenty of opportunity for creative accounting." Ben's hands clenched involuntarily. "How long?" "Based on the metadata from my surveillance, at least 4 months, maybe longer. 4 months of lies." 4 months of Susan kissing him goodbye each morning, sharing dinner conversations, discussing retirement plans, all while betraying everything they'd built together. Ben's phone buzzed. A text from Susan. "Book club running late. Don't wait up. Love you." He showed Jake the message sent 16 minutes ago. Jake checked his tracking data. "Emily's been home with me all evening. Her book club meets Thursdays, not Tuesdays. Bro." The rage building in Ben's chest felt volcanic, but his voice remained steady. "I need to know everything. How deep this goes, what they're planning, what I'm really dealing with." Jake nodded grimly. "I've got some ideas about that, but you're not going to like what we find." The next morning, Ben moved through his normal routine while his mind raced. Susan made breakfast, chattering about her pottery class and weekend plans, her performance flawless. 37 years of teaching had given Ben a keen eye for deception, but Susan's acting was Oscar-worthy. "The Hendersons' anniversary party's Saturday," she said, buttering toast. "Don't you think we should get them something nice? Maybe those crystal glasses from Bloomingdale's?" Ben nodded absently, watching her delicate hands, the wedding ring he'd placed there 6 years ago. "Whatever you think is best." After Susan left for her alleged pottery class, Ben drove to Jake's apartment. His son-in-law had spent the night diving deeper into Ryan Torino's background, and the results were disturbing. 3 previous marriages, Jake reported, spreading printouts across his dining table. Each ended with allegations of financial manipulation. "He's got a pattern. Targets older women with assets, gains their trust, then systematically drains their accounts." Ben studied a court document from Torino's second divorce. His ex-wife claimed he forged her signature on loan applications, opened credit cards in her name, and even tried to change beneficiaries on her life insurance. "The charges were dropped," Jake said grimly. "She couldn't prove intent to defraud, but the pattern's clear." Ben's teacher instincts kicked in. "Show me the timeline." Jake had created a detailed chart mapping Torino's relationships against his financial history. Each marriage coincided with sudden influxes of cash, followed by mysterious investments and business ventures that inevitably failed. "He's a professional predator," Ben concluded. "And Susan's his current mark." "There's more," Jake said, pulling up their shared banking app on his phone. "Check your accounts." Ben logged in and scrolled through recent transactions. His pension deposits were intact, but several smaller transfers caught his attention, amounts Susan could withdraw without triggering alerts but substantial enough to fund an affair. $200 here, $350 there, Jake pointed out, always with explanations. Groceries, household repairs, gifts for Emily. Ben's jaw tightened. None of which actually happened. "Gets worse," Jake said. "I ran a credit check on both your names. Someone's been making inquiries about refinancing your house. Bree." The words hit Ben like a physical blow. The house represented everything. His security, Emily's inheritance, the foundation of his carefully planned retirement. Jake handed him another document. "This was filed with the county recorder's office 3 days ago. A request for information about your property deed and mortgage status." Ben stared at Susan's forged signature on the bottom line. The handwriting was perfect. She'd had plenty of practice signing his name on holiday cards and thank you notes over the years. "She's planning to steal everything," Ben said quietly. "More than that," Jake replied, showing him a life insurance inquiry form, also bearing forged signatures. Susan had requested details about increasing Ben's coverage and changing beneficiary designations. The volcanic rage in Ben's chest crystallized into something cold and calculating. His wife wasn't just cheating. She was positioning herself to profit from his destruction, possibly even his demise. "We need evidence," Ben said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used with difficult classes. "Real evidence that will hold up in court." Jake nodded. "I've got some ideas about that, too." The surveillance equipment Jake installed was virtually invisible. Voice-activated recorders disguised as household objects, a pinhole camera in the smoke detector, GPS tracking on Susan's car. Ben felt like a spy in his own home, but the situation demanded extreme measures. Within a week, they had hours of recorded conversations between Susan and Torino, along with photographic evidence of their meetings at various motels throughout the county. The content was devastating. Ben's completely clueless, Susan's voice came through the hidden speakers as Jake played back the latest recordings. "Thinks I'm this devoted little housewife. Poor old fool." Torino's laughter was cruel. "How much longer do we need to keep this up?" "Not much. I've got him signing papers without reading them. Told him they're just updating our insurance policies. Once the refinancing goes through, we'll have access to almost $200,000 in equity, and if he gets suspicious, he won't. Ben sees what he wants to see, always has." Free. Ben's hands shook as Jake paused the playback. 37 years of teaching had given him thick skin, but hearing his wife discuss his manipulation with such casual contempt felt like being filleted alive. "There's more," Jake said gently. The next recording was even worse. Susan and Torino discussing timeline scenarios, how long Ben might live, how to access his pension benefits, whether his heart condition made him a good candidate for natural causes. "Keep playing," Ben said through gritted teeth. Maybe we're overthinking this, Torino's voice suggested. Older guys like Ben, accidents happen, slip in the bathroom, fall downstairs. Nobody questions a widower's grief, especially when the life insurance pays out. Susan's response chilled Ben to the bone. I've thought about that, but I need to be careful. Emily knows I haven't been the perfect stepmother. If something happens too soon after we clean out his accounts, she might get suspicious. Ben stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Below, normal people were living normal lives, walking dogs, checking mailboxes, tending gardens. His world had become a nightmare of deception and predation. We have enough for criminal charges, Jake said quietly. Fraud, forgery, conspiracy, maybe even attempted extortion. Ben turned back to his son-in-law. No, not yet. They're talking about— I know what they're talking about, Ben interrupted, his voice steady but lethal. And they're going to pay for every word, but we're going to do this right. Completely, thoroughly, devastatingly right. Jake studied his father-in-law's expression and felt a chill of recognition. This was the same controlled fury Ben brought to dealing with bullies and cheaters in his classroom. Calm, methodical, and absolutely ruthless. What did you have in mind? Ben smiled, and Jake suddenly understood why problem students had learned to fear that particular expression. I'm going to teach them both a lesson they'll never forget. The plan Ben devised was elegant in its simplicity. Rather than moving immediately to stop Susan and Torino, he would let them dig their own graves deeper while building an unassailable case against them. Over the next 2 weeks, Ben played the perfect, unsuspecting husband. He signed the documents Susan brought him, agreed to her suggestions about insurance changes, and even accompanied her to a bank appointment, where she introduced him to a financial advisor who was actually Torino's accomplice. But behind the scenes, Ben was documenting everything. He secretly photographed every document before signing it, recorded every conversation, and tracked every transaction. More importantly, he began setting traps. Working with Jake's tech skills and his own methodical planning, Ben created a digital paper trail that would eventually expose the entire conspiracy. He opened a hidden bank account using only his name, transferred his pension deposits there, and began feeding false information about his assets to Susan. Tell me about the boat again, Susan said over dinner one evening, her voice casual but her eyes hungry. Ben smiled innocently. Which boat? The one your brother left you. You said it was worth $30,000. Ben had never owned a boat, never had a brother who owned one, but 2 weeks earlier, he'd made a fake phone call within Susan's hearing, discussing a fictional inheritance from a fictional relative. Oh, that. Yes, it's docked down in Newport. Been thinking about selling it, actually. $35,000 is the current market value. Susan's fork paused halfway to her mouth. You didn't mention wanting to sell it. Well, we could use the money for renovations or maybe that European trip you've been wanting. He watched Susan's mind race, calculating, planning. That evening, the hidden recorders captured her excited call to Torino, updating him on the new asset they could target. Each fictional treasure Ben dangled before them. A vintage car in storage, stocks inherited from his first wife, a safety deposit box full of coins, was carefully documented and recorded. By the time he was finished, Susan and Torino had confessed on tape to planning thefts of property that didn't exist. Meanwhile, Jake was working his own angle. Using his software development connections, he'd created fake social media profiles and begun feeding Torino information about other potential victims. Wealthy widows, retired executives, anyone who might seem like an easy mark. Torino took the bait enthusiastically, boasting about his methods and sharing details of past cons. Soon, Jake had recorded evidence of multiple ongoing fraud schemes. He's got at least 6 women on the hook right now, Jake reported during one of their clandestine meetings. A retired nurse in Portland, a widow in Salem, even some woman in California he's been stringing along online. Ben shook his head grimly. Professional predator, just like we thought. How many lives has he destroyed? Based on what I've uncovered, probably dozens. Some of these women lost their entire retirement savings. The scope of Torino's criminal enterprise was staggering, but it also gave Ben an idea for the perfect revenge, one that would not only destroy his wife's betrayer but potentially help his previous victims recover their losses. I think it's time to contact the authorities, Ben said, but not the local police. This is federal. Fraud, wire fraud, racketeering. We need the FBI. Jake's eyes widened. Are you sure? Once we involve federal agents, there's no going back. Oh, I'm sure. Susan and her boyfriend want to play in the big leagues. Let's see how they handle federal prison. Special Agent Patricia Vance had investigated financial crimes for 15 years, but the case Ben Walker brought to her was unusually well documented. Most fraud victims came to the FBI with suspicions and fragments of evidence. Ben arrived with recording equipment, detailed financial records, and a comprehensive timeline of criminal activity. Mr. Walker, Agent Vance said, reviewing the materials in her Portland field office, "This is remarkable work. You should consider a career change." Ben's smile was grim. "I'll stick to teaching, though I suppose there are some similarities." Agent Vance spread the photographs and transcripts across her desk. "Let me make sure I understand the scope here. Your wife and Ryan Torino have been conducting an affair while systematically defrauding you of marital assets. That's just the beginning," Ben replied. He handed her Jake's research on Torino's other victims. "We believe he's been running similar cons across multiple states for over a decade." The agent whistled softly as she reviewed the evidence. Wire fraud, mail fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit federal crimes. Mr. Torino has been busy. What about my wife? Forgery, conspiracy, possible accessory to racketeering if we can prove she knew about his other victims. Agent Vance looked up from the documents. "She's looking at serious federal time." Ben felt a cold satisfaction. "What happens next? We'll need you to continue your normal routine while we build the case. Can you do that? Keep pretending nothing's wrong?" Ben thought of Susan's performance that morning, chattering about weekend plans while secretly planning his financial destruction. "I think I can manage that. We'll also need to coordinate with other field offices to round up Torino's other operations simultaneously. This kind of predator is like a spider. Pull one thread, and the whole web collapses." Agent Vance began organizing the evidence into neat stacks. "One more thing, Mr. Walker. When we move on this, it's going to be fast and comprehensive. Your wife will be arrested at your home, probably in the early morning. Are you prepared for that?" Ben had been preparing for this moment since the first time he'd seen that dashboard footage. "Agent Vance, I've been watching my wife lie to my face for months while planning to steal everything I've worked for. Watching her get arrested will be the most honest moment of our marriage." The agent's expression softened slightly. "I'm sorry you're going through this. Betrayal by a spouse. It's one of the worst things people experience." Ben stood to leave, gathering his copies of the evidence. "You know what the worst part is? It's not the money or even the infidelity. It's that she made me complicit in my own destruction, had me signing papers, trusting her, believing in us. She weaponized my love against me." He paused at the door. "But she made one crucial mistake." "What's that?" Ben's smile was arctic. "She underestimated what happens when you try to con a teacher. We specialize in catching cheaters. The raids occurred simultaneously across 4 states at 6 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday. Ben was drinking coffee in his kitchen when the FBI tactical team surrounded his house. Even though Agent Vance had warned him this would happen, the reality was jarring. Susan was still in her bathrobe when Agent Vance knocked on the front door, warrant in hand. "Susan Walker, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery, and racketeering," Agent Vance announced as Susan opened the door. The look of shock on Susan's face was absolute. She turned toward Ben, confusion and fear warring in her expression. "Ben, what's happening? What's going on?" Ben set down his coffee cup carefully. "The same thing that's happening to your boyfriend right now, justice." Susan's face went white as the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. "You knew. How long have you known?" "Long enough to document every crime you committed, every lie you told, every plan you made." Ben's voice was professorial, calm, devastating. "Did you really think you could steal from a teacher without me noticing patterns, checking your work, grading your performance?" The FBI agents began searching the house methodically, seizing documents and electronic devices. Susan struggled against the handcuffs, her composure completely shattered. "This is insane," she screamed. "Ben, tell them this is all a mistake. I'm your wife." "You're a criminal," Ben replied coldly, "and criminals face consequences." Agent Vance stepped forward. "Mrs. Walker, we have recordings of you planning to defraud your husband, forge his signature, and potentially harm him. You have the right to remain silent." "Recordings?" Susan's voice cracked. "Ben, you recorded me? You spied on me?" Ben's laugh was bitter. "I protected myself from a predator who happened to be sleeping in my bed." As the agents led Susan toward their vehicle, she tried one last manipulation. Ben, please. This is all a misunderstanding. I love you. I've always loved you. Ben followed them outside, where neighbors were gathering to watch the spectacle. Susan, you told your boyfriend 3 days ago that I was a pathetic old fool who wouldn't last much longer anyway. It's on tape. Susan's composure finally cracked completely. You recorded me? You spied on me in our own home? I protected myself from a criminal conspiracy, Ben replied coldly. Something I should have done the moment I met you. The FBI vehicle's engine roared to life, but Susan fought against being placed inside. Ben, don't let them do this. We can work this out. Agent Vance had to physically restrain Susan as she lunged toward Ben, handcuffs rattling. You're destroying us. We had plans. We had a future. You had plans to steal my future, Ben shot back. Now you've got 7 to 12 years in federal prison to think about those plans. Susan's eyes went wild. 7 to 12? What are you talking about, Ben? What did you do? I graded your performance, Ben said quietly. You failed. As the FBI vehicle pulled away with Susan inside, Ben felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. For the first time in months, he could breathe freely. Jake emerged from his own house across the street, where he'd been watching the arrests. How do you feel? Ben considered the question carefully. Free, angry, betrayed, but mostly educated. I learned something important today. The difference between love and manipulation, between trust and stupidity, between being a good man and being a victim. Jake nodded toward the FBI vehicles disappearing around the corner. You think she'll try to make a deal? Ben's smile was sharp. Oh, I'm counting on it. The more she talks, the more evidence they'll have against Torino's entire network. Susan always was a gifted performer. Let's see how well she does on the federal stage. The trial lasted 6 weeks and dominated local news coverage. Ben sat in the gallery every day, watching Susan's defense attorney try unsuccessfully to paint her as a victim of Torino's manipulation. The prosecution, led by Assistant U.S. Attorney Michelle Torres, systematically demolished that narrative using Ben's recordings and Jake's digital evidence. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Torres said during her opening statement, this case is about predators who targeted a man's love and trust to steal his life savings. The defendant wasn't deceived. She was an active participant in a criminal enterprise. Susan's attorney, an expensive private lawyer paid for with what remained of her personal assets, tried to argue coercion and emotional manipulation. My client was manipulated by Ryan Torino, a seasoned con artist who exploited her loneliness and vulnerability, the defense argued. She was as much a victim as anyone. But the recordings told a different story. Hour after hour, the jury listened to Susan enthusiastically planning Ben's financial destruction, discussing timeline scenarios for accessing his pension, even laughing about his trusting nature. The most damaging evidence came from a conversation recorded just days before the arrests, where Susan said, I'm tired of pretending to care about his boring history lessons and his stupid retirement plans. Let's clean him out and disappear. He's too pathetic to fight back anyway. Ben watched Susan flinch as her own words condemned her. She glanced toward him once during that playback, and he met her gaze steadily. No anger now, just cold assessment. The courtroom erupted when Torres played the recording where Susan and Torino discussed natural causes scenarios for Ben's potential demise. Several jurors visibly recoiled, and one elderly woman shook her head in disgust. Your Honor, Susan's attorney objected. This recording is taken completely out of context. Overruled, Judge Morrison declared. The jury will hear the full context of the defendant's own words. When Torino took the stand in his own defense, his arrogance was breathtaking. Even facing multiple federal charges, he tried to charm the jury with stories of his difficult childhood and failed marriages. I never meant to hurt anyone, Torino testified. I was just trying to build a life with Susan. Sometimes things got complicated, but my intentions were always honest. The prosecution's cross-examination was brutal. Mr. Torino, did you have honest intentions when you forged Mr. Walker's signature on loan applications? That was Susan's idea. Did you have honest intentions when you discussed whether Mr. Walker might die of natural causes before you could steal his pension? That was taken out of context. Did you have honest intentions when you told Susan that older men like Mr. Walker were good targets because nobody questions accidents? Ibrahim Torino's composure finally cracked. You don't understand the pressure I was under. Susan was demanding more money, threatening to leave if I didn't deliver. She was the one pushing for more aggressive tactics. Susan leaped to her feet in the defendant's chair. "Liar! You manipulated me into everything. You said Ben wouldn't miss a few $1,000s. Order!" Judge Morrison slammed his gavel. "Miss Walker, sit down immediately or you'll be held in contempt." Ben watched Susan's face as her partner threw her under the bus. Whatever love or partnership they'd shared evaporated under the harsh lights of federal prosecution. During Torres's closing argument, she played selected recordings while pointing directly at Susan. "Ladies and gentlemen, listen to the defendant's own words. This is not a woman who was manipulated or coerced. This is a woman who called her husband pathetic while planning his financial destruction." Susan sobbed throughout the closing arguments, but the jury's faces remained stone cold. After deliberating for less than 4 hours, they returned with their verdict. On the charge of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of forgery in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of racketeering, we find the defendant guilty. Susan collapsed as each guilty verdict was read, finally understanding that her performance had failed its most important audience. Torino stared straight ahead, his predatory charm finally exhausted. Judge Catherine Morrison sentenced them 2 weeks later, and the courtroom was packed with media and spectators. "Mr. Torino, you are a career criminal who has victimized vulnerable people across multiple states for over a decade. This court sentences you to 12 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. You will also pay restitution to all identified victims, totaling approximately $1.2 million. Torino's legs nearly buckled as he absorbed the sentence. The bailiff stepped closer, ready to catch him if he fell. "Miss Walker, while your role was somewhat less extensive, you actively participated in defrauding your own husband, a man who trusted you completely. This court sentences you to 7 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation." Susan sobbed uncontrollably as the bailiffs led her away. She looked toward Ben one final time, her face desperate and pleading. Ben stood slowly, straightened his tie, and walked out of the courtroom without a backward glance. Emily found him later that evening, sitting on his porch with a glass of whiskey and the local newspaper. The headline read, "Local Teacher Exposes Multi-State Fraud Ring." "Dad," Emily's voice was tentative. She'd attended some of the trial proceedings but struggled with the complex emotions of watching her stepmother get convicted. Ben looked up at his daughter, his real family, the one person whose love had never been performance or manipulation. "How are you holding up, sweetheart?" "Abraham." Emily sat beside him on the porch swing. "I keep thinking I should have seen it. Susan was always asking weird questions about your finances, your health insurance, your retirement plans. I thought she was just being caring. She was very good at her performance," Ben said gently. "Even I believed it for 6 years. Are you angry at me for not seeing through her?" Ben set down his whiskey and took his daughter's hand. "Emily, you were protecting your relationship with me. You wanted me to be happy. There's nothing wrong with that." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. "What happens now?" Emily asked eventually. Ben considered the question. The house felt empty without Susan's constant chatter, but it also felt clean, free of deception and hidden agendas. "Now I figure out who I am when I'm not being someone's mark," he said. "I've got my pension, the house, enough savings to last as long as I need. Most importantly, I've got my self-respect back." Emily squeezed his hand. "I'm proud of you, Dad, for fighting back, for not letting them destroy you." Ben smiled, feeling lighter than he had in months. "You know what your mother used to say, that the best revenge is living well. I think she was only partly right. What's the other part?" "The best revenge is making sure the people who tried to destroy you face the consequences of their choices." Susan and Torino didn't just steal money. They stole trust, peace of mind, security. They deserved everything they got. Jake appeared around the corner, carrying 2 beers and wearing a satisfied expression. "Saw the news coverage. Torres says they're already getting tips about other Torino victims from across the country." Ben accepted one of the beers. "How many?" "At least 15 so far. The FBI thinks this case might break open fraud rings in 6 states. Emily shook her head in amazement. "Dad, you didn't just save yourself. You saved all those other people." Ben took a long drink of his beer, thinking about the elderly nurse in Portland who'd lost her retirement savings, the widow in Salem who'd been swindled out of her late husband's insurance payout. "Sometimes you have to choose," he said finally. "You can be a victim, or you can be the person who stops the victimizers. I chose to stop them." The three of them sat on the porch as darkness fell, talking about the future instead of the past. For the first time in months, Ben felt like he had a future worth planning. His phone buzzed with a text message from Agent Vance. "Torino's network is unraveling. Arrests in 3 more states today. Your evidence is helping prosecutors nationwide." "Thank you." Ben showed the message to Emily and Jake, then deleted it. Justice had been served, revenge had been achieved, and the predators who targeted him were facing the consequences of their choices. Tomorrow, he would start rebuilding. Tonight, he would simply enjoy being free. As he sat there with his real family, Ben reflected on the strange journey that had brought him to this moment. A simple dashboard video, intended to expose one affair, had revealed something far more sinister and given him the tools to fight back against it. Susan had been right about one thing: he was getting older, and he did live partly in the past, but she'd miscalculated his capacity for learning, adapting, and striking back when threatened. After all, he was a teacher, and sometimes the most important lessons are taught outside the classroom. 2 years later, Ben received a letter forwarded through his attorney. It was from Susan, written from federal prison in Danbury, Connecticut. The envelope had been opened and inspected by prison officials, but the letter inside was intact. "Dear Ben." It began in Susan's familiar handwriting. "I know you probably won't read this, but I need to try. I've had 2 years to think about what I did to you, to us, to our marriage. I can't undo any of it, but I want you to know that I understand now how wrong I was." Ben almost threw the letter away, but something made him continue reading. "The other women here, some of them are victims like the ones Ryan targeted. Hearing their stories, seeing their pain, I finally understand what we put you through, what I put you through. You trusted me completely, and I betrayed that trust in the worst possible way. I'm not asking for forgiveness, I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that the woman who planned to steal your future is gone. Prison changes you, or it destroys you. I chose to be changed. I hope you're happy. I hope you found peace. You deserve so much better than what I gave you. Susan." He breathed. Ben folded the letter carefully and placed it in his desk drawer. He felt no satisfaction from her remorse, no desire for reconciliation, but also no anger. Susan had become a stranger to him, a cautionary tale about the dangers of misplaced trust. That evening, Emily and her children visited for dinner. His grandson, Tommy, now 8, insisted on showing Ben his latest history project, a poster about World War II heroes. "Grandpa Ben," Tommy said seriously, "my teacher says you're a real-life hero because you caught bad guys and helped other people." Ben knelt down to Tommy's level. "You know what makes someone a real hero, Tommy? What? Standing up for what's right, even when it's hard, even when it hurts, even when the bad guys are people you thought you could trust." Tommy nodded solemnly. "Like you did with Grandma Susan. Like I did with Grandma Susan." Brr. Later, after Emily's family had gone home, Ben sat on his porch with a cup of coffee and watched the stars emerge in the clear night sky. The house was quiet, peaceful, truly his own for the first time in years. He thought about Susan's letter, about Torino's victims who were slowly recovering their stolen assets, about the fraud prevention programs that had been implemented because of his case. The ripple effects of his choice to fight back continued spreading outward, protecting other potential victims from the predators who hunted them. Brew. The final irony wasn't lost on him. Susan and Torino had planned to steal his future. Instead, they'd given him something more valuable than money, the knowledge that he was stronger than they'd ever imagined, smarter than they'd ever suspected, and more ruthless than they'd ever feared. As the first stars appeared overhead, Ben raised his coffee mug in a silent toast. To justice served, lessons learned, and predators caged where they belonged. The lesson was over, class dismissed,